Meme review, just kidding. Let's talk about Tucker Carlson and Twitter. Now you might be wondering, am I always talking about Fox News or Tucker Carlson, or, why does it seem like I talk about conservative things a lot? I'm not particularly conservative at all, but the way conservative media is run does fascinate me. And they do things slightly different than liberal journalists do. So it's always interesting to analyze their responses to things. So I listened to all the audio recordings of what Media Matters had put together of Tucker Carlson, and what he said was pretty obnoxious and moronic, and I don't think any normal person would disagree with that. But I feel like what's ultimately the case is that it's the exact same thing as what happened to Kevin Hart, right? And that's why there was no host at the Oscars. And the same thing that happened to James Gunn, who is the director of the superhero movies. And that, ultimately, we as a society have to decide whether what somebody says 10 years ago can be held against them in the present, right? Ultimately, we have to decide, is there a statute of limitations on things an individual says in their past that can then be charged against them in the court of public opinion in the present? And I think any reasonable person, myself included, would be yeah, there definitely is. Nobody's the same person they were 10 years ago, and I don't care if that's because you're 10 and now you're 20 years old, or you're 40 and now you're 50. Your personality and your mindset and your perspective still iterates a ton no matter whom you are in a decade. And you see this with anybody who's ever responded to criticism about them on the internet, about things they've written or said in the past. They always go, that doesn't actually represent me, or my views have changed, or that was taken out of context, or yeah, what I said was foolish, and I didn't fully understand the fractal, the ramifications of what I was saying. I meant it as a joke, or I meant it lightheartedly. And I think most reasonable people go yeah. And most reasonable people, I think, would get ruined if what they said 10 years ago was, recorded and transcribed, or, shot on video and then leaked to the public. I don't think anybody in their right mind hasn't said stupid things in their past. Whether they're just hanging out with their friends drinking beer, or they had some ridiculous ideologies, people change, and people also just are hypocrites. Being a hypocrite is a very human thing. And calling somebody, a hypocrite and holding them to it, I find is, at the end of the day, it's a very human fault and human trait. So I don't really have any problem with somebody changing their views, or, being yeah, that's just what it was, 10 years ago. I don't know what I was thinking. But this gets back to my larger point, is that, ultimately, it seems like in society, because of digital media and the way everything is logged now in life, that we're going to, in society, have to come up, collectively, with a new set of social norms. And those social norms are kind of the statute of limitations on what an individual can be held to account for in the court of public opinion. Just like we have a statute of limitations even in criminal courts, right? Because we view it as we're not going to try you at 35 for, stealing the candy bar when you were 17. That was 10 years ago. That was, different person. It's not worth it, you're now a productive member of society, or a family, blah, 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 blah. And so I think there's that issue, and once again, this Tucker Carlson thing brings to light the same issue that plagues everybody across the board, ultimately, regardless of their political views. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same fulcrum of a problem that Kevin Hart experiences, or James Gunn experiences, or Tucker Carlson experiences, or Sarah Jung at the New York Times, or Quentin Norton, or Kevin Williamson, I think, was the writer for The Atlantic. It's always the same thing. But what I find so interesting about the Tucker Carlson case in particular is that I think we're starting to see a shift in how people respond to the kind of Twitter mob, the court of public opinion when it comes calling, knocking on their door. And that you saw it a little bit with Kevin Hart saying nah, screw it. I'm just going to step down for the Oscars. You keep bringing up old tweets. I apologized to him for a while ago. That's just not who I am. Forget it. It's not worth the headache. I'm not going to go on an apology tour again. Forget it. Just forget it. And now you're seeing with Tucker Carlson, who once again just released a Twitter statement saying, rather than just beg for an apology, how about this? How about I'm on TV live every day for an hour? You can see how I view and think about things in the present, and, then make up your mind that way. You just straight up refuse to go on an apology tour. And in some ways, I'm inclined to think that's actually the best approach, because that approach is not caving to the kind of ridiculousness that is the court of public opinion without any statute of limitations, which is that, like, when you cede to the fact of, like, oh, yes, you know, terrible, 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 you then cede all of the authority and the power to the Twitter mob, and the context to the Twitter mob, or who's ever making the accusations, right? Or Media Matters, or whatever. You're ceding the context to them. And from a principle going forward, I think it's interesting to observe that really the better way of handling these situations may indeed be, you know, kind of the Donald Trump approach, which is like doubling down, being like, you know, that was whatever, forget it, you know, I'm not apologizing, we're moving forward, that was in the past. And I'm starting to think, I mean, you know, as data points come in, this may be the better approach in terms of reputation, you know, repair or damage control. But I'll be interested to see. You know, some advertisers have obviously pulled out of Tucker Carlson's show, so we'll see what happens. But I think we're seeing enough instances of this happening in our society that obviously it's calling into question, like, how we define, or we'll need to redefine some new social mores about how long you can hold people's, you know, stances and views and perspectives and opinions and things they've said to them throughout their life. Anyway, that's just a thought. You know, if you guys have a thought, so leave a comment, you know, or watch another video if you're interested in that. But I'm actually curious to see what you guys think. You know, should there be a kind of statute of limitations collectively in a society about holding people to account in the court of public opinion about things they've said in their past? You know, and then if so, like, what is that line? Is it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago? Be interested to see your thoughts. Anyway, thanks for watching as always. See you guys tomorrow.